So we as coaches and Scrum Masters always try and find different ways to hone our skills, right? To get better at what we're doing. And I'm sure servant leadership is one such trait that's probably at the top of the list that we want to hone. In today's presentation, it's going to be an interactive discussion with our presenter, Grant, on learnings from a book that he's read, which is The 7 Pillars of Servant Leadership. We'll basically learn the basics of servant leadership and different approaches to implement them. So it's definitely going to be a very interesting presentation and lots of interactive discussion. A little about our speaker for the day. Grant is a thought leader within the Agile Denver community. He currently serves as a senior Scrum Master and an Agile coach at CVS Health. And he supports product design teams with a focus on increasing business agility and maturity for high performance teams in lean, agile, and safe. He enjoys brainstorming and exchanging ideas with other Agile professionals in both tactical and leadership applications through collaboration and mentorship. When not talking or thinking about Agile and safe, his favorite subjects are personal finance, economics, and road cycling. Please join me in welcoming Grant Warden. Grant, over to you.
Thank you, everybody. Nice to see you. Thank you for the virtual applause there. I appreciate that. I will share my screen in just a minute, but I wanted to take some time first to get to know you a little bit better. You've probably heard the expression, know your audience. As a speaker, that's always important. So I'd like to ask you to go to the chat, everybody. And I'm going to exempt Meg, because Meg already put in her title that she's a senior Scrum Master. But go to the chat and just type in your role, maybe some of your POs or coaches or Scrum Masters or something. So go to the chat and please type in what you do for a living, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you, David. Developer, Agile coach, Lucy, Scrum Master. Engineering manager, but did you have your CSM and CSPO? Thank you, Jeff. Delivery manager, CSM, manager of Agile project managers, great. PMs, taking the certified CSD. David, what is that? I don't know what that is. Certified Scrum something, developer, maybe? Is that what that is? Yes, thank you. CSPO, great. Okay, most of you are certainly familiar with this concept. And I wanted to also ask, if you are brand new to the whole concept of servant leadership, just put a thumbs up in the chat or put the word yes, either one. I'd like to know if anybody here is brand new to that so I can help you to provide some context around what this means for you. But it sounds like most of you are working in some kind of Agile or Scrum environment with your companies, and you probably are not too strange, or you are familiar with the kind of stuff we're going to be talking about tonight. When I was preparing for this with Shruti, we talked about this concept of back to basics. And I don't know about you, but I certainly feel like as a Scrum Master, which is what I do every day, and an Agile coach, you sort of get to know your teams and you kind of wander off and do some things with this team, and maybe you do some things with that team. And then after a while, you start to ask yourself, wait a minute, do I need to kind of reset on what my Agile and safe principles and Scrum principles are? And I think that the answer is sometimes, for me anyways, yes. And one of the ways that I can ground myself is through these pillars of servant leadership. One of the things that I like to do when I give these presentations is talk about a theme that has relevance and application beyond just your job. And Shruti knows when I've done this in the past, I try to incorporate some ideas that you can take with you no matter what you do. This book, which is in my slide, it's blurred out, but it's not specific to the Scrum Master role. In fact, I don't even think the book mentions the word Scrum Master. However, there are these fundamental principles that apply to certainly the Scrum Master role, but also to POs and anybody else who lives and breathes the Agile mindset. So that's the key takeaway for tonight. What we're going to do as we go through the slides is talk about each of the 7 pillars. And after each slide, we're going to have a short Q&A. This is designed to be very interactive tonight, so please have your fingers standing by to go off of mute. And if you just want to stay off of mute, that's fine, because we probably won't take more than about 5 minutes for each slide or so. But all these concepts will be things that you've heard before, you've seen before, and this is an opportunity for all of us to learn from each other. It's not just me telling you things that you don't know, it's probably things that you do know, but I always find it's educational for me and hopefully all of you to learn how other people apply some of these principles and some of these skills. So that's the agenda for tonight. All right, let me share my screen, and then Shruti, again, if you can monitor the chat, I won't be able to see it when I share, so let me know. And if you have any questions, feel free to just jump in anytime. So stand by, please.
Absolutely. Yeah, and feel free to go ahead and post your questions in the chat. And as Grant mentioned, every few minutes, as soon as we go through a slide, we'll have a break and we can bring those up.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody. By the way, has anybody read this book? If you've read it, just give me a thumbs up on your video or put a yes in chat. It's kind of an old book. I forgot when it was written, but I think maybe 10 or 15 years ago, something like that. And it's really based upon the teachings of Robert Greenleaf. Some of you probably know that name. He was the first one to come up with the term servant leadership. That was in an essay that he wrote, I think back in around 1990 or something like that. So this concept has been around really long before the Agile Manifesto, but it gained some traction with Agile, I think, and with Scrum, because we talk so much about this concept of the Scrum Master role being that of a servant leadership. 2 main things we want to talk about tonight. Shruti alluded to these already. The first one is that this book is about not only explaining the 7 pillars, but also this quote here: how do I begin implementing servant leadership in your workplace? Again, most of you are practicing servant leaders in one form or another, but if it's new to you, then you should come away with tonight with a couple of tangible ideas of how you can integrate some of these skills and some of these pillars into your workplace. And that's what I want to focus on, is something you can take away that's a positive benefit for you. The second one says that this book coaches readers in how to evolve the competencies necessary to lead by serving first. And we're going to see some of these competencies, but I don't know about you, but I've always kind of struggled with this concept of servant leader. It's kind of an oxymoron to me. And I've always thought, well, how can you lead if you're serving at the same time? And I want to explore this concept with a lot of you tonight, because maybe you've thought about that as well. And I'd love to hear how you've kind of reconciled those 2 terms. But I think that it can be a bit of a struggle sometimes. So we're going to explore how to overcome that tonight. The book talks a lot about stories, exercises, case studies, things like that. So if you want to pick up the book, certainly you can to take a deeper dive, but we're going to cover the highlights tonight. What's the first pillar? It says that a servant leader is a person of character. And that means that you make ethical and principle-centered decisions. I'm just going to read these. I won't read every word. You can just follow along with me. But a servant leader is someone who's honest, trustworthy, authentic, humble. We lead by conscience, not ego. We have a sense and spirit of enthusiasm, and we're really serving beyond just ourselves. Some of you probably use the phrase, or when you're talking to your teams, things like, it's not about me, it's about you. That's what I say a lot. It was, I'm not here to make me look good, I'm here to make you look good. And that's, to me, what servant leader is all about. So we're a person of character, not about ego, it's about what the team can do. There's a quote I want to read to you from the book. It's attributed to John Wooden. You've probably heard it in some variation, but really it says that the true test of a man's character is what he does when no one's watching. And you've probably heard that in some shape or form before. But that's what this means, is we are We serve our team based upon fundamental principles and a mindset of service. I learned from the book that the word charak is Greek, and that's the origin of the word character. And that is, interestingly enough, a word that means inscribed or engraved. So it's something which is, written in stone, so to speak, and that's where your character comes from. What are the core competencies? We maintain integrity, we demonstrate humility, and of course, we serve a higher purpose. All right, easy enough. Pillar one, a person of character. Now it's your turn. What resonates with you about this first pillar, this first slide?
I think humility is definitely, I think, a core character for a Scrum Master, because it's not about us, it's about our team, right? It's about how, we're like the invisible force that gets our team to their end goal, right? So I think that's one thing that resonates with me.
I see. Actually, I can't see the chat, Shruti.
So in the chat, Meg says, filled with a depth of spirit and enthusiasm. Sure relates to that. Yeah. And feel free to speak up and also share your questions in the chat.
Yeah.
Hey, Grant.
Go ahead.
I find the one probably that's most challenging in a corporate world is serving a higher purpose. Sometimes I lose track of what the higher purpose is. Yeah, my higher purpose, the team's higher purpose, our company's higher purpose. So, all those levels. So I go back and I try to, I ask my leadership, the folks in my leadership, like, why are we doing this? The why, the whys, the big whys. So yeah, that's one that.
Great call out. Just one comment on that is, you may know the book by Simon Sinek called Start With Why, and you may have seen his YouTube video. It was on TED Talk. I think it's one of the top 5 most watched TED Talks of all time or something like that. And he talks about the golden circle, which you may have seen. And he starts on the outside with the, what does a company do? The inside circle says, how do we do it? And the innermost circle is the why. Basically what he says is that any company can have a what, anyone can have a how, but the way that you really build customer allegiance and loyalty is through that why. If you know the why behind everything you do, then everything else falls into place. So great comment about purpose, absolutely.
Awesome. And there are a few other comments here in the chat. Jeff and Robin say that lead by conscience, not by ego or by revenue targets. That's something that they resonate with. That's an interesting one. And Shana says to serve something beyond oneself.
Yep. Yeah, I actually have a quote on a subsequent slide that talks about what Greenleaf meant originally when he talked about servant leadership. But all these are great comments, and I actually can see the chat now, Shruti, so I can follow along with you much easier. All right, let's take a look at, take a look at pillar number 2. A servant leader.
Sorry, I had my hand up, but nobody seemed to be paying attention. So I think maintaining integrity to me is definitely central to being a person of character, because integrity is about walking the talk, is about your actions mimic what you say. And you won't be able to build trust if you cannot demonstrate through your actions that you are following through on what you ask of other people or on what you say you're going to follow through from a Scrum Master, right? Removing impediments. Say, yeah, I'll help you out, and nothing happens. You're quickly going to lose any kind of credibility about the content of your character if you're not following through on your commitments.
I'm sorry that we missed your hand up. I actually saw it, but then it went away. So Shruti, maybe you can
Yeah.
help me keep an eye on that. So apologize
Absolutely.
for that.
Yeah, I
Thank
was
you.
Yeah, I'll like to add to that. Andre, is it?
It is.
Made a really good point. I'm a huge, as a developer, you know, I come from a slightly different perspective from probably a lot of you, but one of the things that Bob Martin talks about is establishing trust from a developer standpoint. And I've seen this throughout my career in the IT sector, especially, not so much in the product sector, but in the IT sector, where companies definitely build these silos, and IT is one of those silos. And a lot of times the rest of the business, the rest of the enterprise looks at IT and developers especially as, you know, we just sit there and play games and, you know, we touch the keyboard a little bit and magic happens. And a lot of times we don't get the credit that we deserve because we don't act in a professional, highly integrated, I'm not sure how
Integral.
integral.
Yeah.
There's a good word. Yeah, I don't know how I turn that into the right verb. In a professional way, because we have gotten this reputation for being kind of cavalier, you know, know-it-alls, and you know, we don't really want to talk to you, and so that integrity I have found through the Agile methodology and the pillars of just Agile in general, is that we are trying to build that trust between development and the business, product owners, stakeholders, everybody else. And I have found over time that the Agile method definitely promotes that, because of the iterative process and bringing product owners and stakeholders back into the mix often and repetitively. We build this trust over time because they see progress, and we provide, you know, one of the biggest things is the commitment ceremony, right? Where we as developers, and really everybody involved, commits to doing something in the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, what have you. And that's a promise. And when you deliver on that promise, then that level of integrity is shared by all, and people start to trust each other. And that's, you know, that's where the character comes in, and projects, you know, are much more successful when everybody trusts each other.
Nobody here would argue with that, David. And I would like to say for the record that I do not think of my developers as people who play games all day and type a few things on their keyboard. So I have much more respect for you than what you said before.
No, they play
I'm
games
with
all
you,
night.
Grant.
My Scrum teams are amazing. I will say they're amazing. My developers are.
They
I
do make
couldn't-
magic happen.
Exactly. They make
Yes,
They do.
Yes, they do.
but
We
not by
will
playing
certainly-
video games.
That's correct.
Correct.
No, that's what happens between, 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. is when they play the
Right.
games.
That's it.
Sleeping is optional, right?
David, you talked about the word trust, and some of you may know the book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. Great book that talks about how to build high performance teams. And he says that if you've read it, of these 5 dysfunctions, it goes in order where you have your very bottom one, your fundamental, and you kind of builds up from there. But the number one dysfunction of most teams is an absence of trust. That is an absolutely fundamental, let's use the word pillar, to having relationships that you want with other members of your team or your train, if you use SAFe, a foundation, absolutely. So a great call out on that word there. I know I think about that in my role as how can I build credibility and trust with my partner teams, including development or architecture. I support design teams. So we do all the design work, and then we hand it off to other teams, and we want to build those relationships too. All right, great feedback. Thank you. Let's take a look at pillar number 2. A servant leader puts people first. What does that mean? It means that we help others meet their highest priority development needs. Funny how we segue into development needs right off the bat there, David. We seek first to serve, then we aspire to lead. So it starts with the fundamental principle of service first. Our self-interest is connected to the needs and interests of others. We serve in a manner that allows those served to grow as persons, and we express genuine care and concern, which means we stop calling people resources to introduce the yes. So here's the quote I mentioned earlier. This is directly from Robert Greenleaf. He said that true leadership emerges from one whose primary motivation is a deep desire to serve. Action on the impulse to serve does not mean that one is a, quote, service provider, a martyr, or a slave, but one who consciously nurtures the mature growth of self, others, institutions, and communities, the objective of which is to stimulate thought and action for building a better, more caring society. So that sounds kind of warm and fuzzy, especially for 30 years ago, but this to me is the essence of how I can reconcile the servant and the leader. It's really not about being a slave or being at someone's beck and call, not at all. It's about being a servant to one first, but then thinking about how can I elevate people around me? That's how I translate it. I think of how can I make other people around me on my team better? That's kind of the essence of servant leadership to me. What are some of the competencies? We show care and concern. We're mentor-minded. I love that concept. And we display a servant's heart. All right, what stands out here? What resonates with you?
There's some comments here, Grant, I think we should go over.
Yeah.
Lucy says what that basically means, like, we should stop calling people resources. True. I think we have to move past the project management terminology, I guess.
Can
The
we
good old
still
days.
use, can we still use the terms chickens and pigs?
No.
I haven't heard that before.
Hey, Grant says no.
Oh, I haven't heard that in a long time, but
Yeah.
I think that involves the word commitment, isn't that correct?
Indeed.
Yeah. And then Andre says, enable their success will enable your own success. True.
Yeah. Yep,
Yeah.
love that one.
And then Vivek says, or he has a question, can serving the needs be beyond development, meaning, not specific to your work? It could be anything else, personal life too. So
it certainly does to me. I'd like to hear what others of you have to say, but I think a part of my role as a servant leader is to not just execute on ceremonies and all the things that the book says, but I want to make other people better facilitators, better communicators, better leaders themselves, better presenters. So I will often talk to my team and say, hey, who would like to lead daily stand-up tomorrow? We'll do kind of a rotational system. Or I'll say, maybe someone's ready to lead an actual sprint demo, or maybe even a retro at some point in time. Or I'll say, hey, how can I help you prepare for this presentation coming up? What about your professional development goals? Now, a lot of you know that the Scrum Master doesn't have that formal authority, so we don't manage people generally, and therefore we don't talk to people about their individual development plan or professional development goals formally. But I like to ask people and say, hey, what are things that you want to work on this year, and how can I help you with that beyond just your job? Yes, empower others, absolutely.
I think this kind of ties back to folks when we were saying about playing games. As an engineering manager, I've seen people not being passionate about or paying attention or giving their full 100% or how much ever during jobs or meeting or whatever. And then when you probe more, and they might be playing games or whatever they might be doing, and when you probe more, you find out you find out the true reason behind why they are not giving their full self to whatever they're asked as a part of their job. Mm-hmm. And that is always tied to there's something happening in their personal life. Yeah. that is triggering it. Or you or the company is doing poor job of making them excited about their job. And that's where the core competencies like showing care and concern kind of comes into play. About find out the real reason, and then you'll probably solve the true problem and not come up with, hey, you're playing games, you're not paying attention, whatever that might mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. Andre
Yeah.
wrote in here about bringing your whole self to work. That's a term I've heard before as well, which I love. That's great.
One of the things I do, because I work at a directorship level, so I have several teams that I'm managing. And, obviously my job is to not only ensure they deliver, but also that they grow as individuals. And to me, one of the best ways to build trust is to see the people beyond being a resource that enables the project, right? Beyond, you're a developer, you're a tester, you're, a QAer, or you're wearing all these hats interchangeably within your Agile team. And that everybody's got a story behind who they bring to work, right? I was talking to one of my team members earlier this week, and I was like, hey, how you doing? And he's like, well, he goes, not too great. And then, I didn't pry as to what was wrong, but I said, if you need to take some time off to deal with something, do that. And I reminded them, what resources they had access to, company resources, if they needed the employee assistance program, if, they needed whatever. But I said, go take care of you, because, you are not okay. And you're probably not going to bring your best work because your mind is somewhere else, or you're physically not feeling right, whatever it is. And that to me is so fundamental, that if you do not feel comfortable showing up at work to go and come and do your contributions, and people who are there are not enabling that, you're going to run into challenges, because people just don't feel they can be authentic. They sort of have to put on a persona, which takes extra energy to be able to show up and work.
Yeah, that would be exhausting. And Andre, you read my mind. Like, bring your authentic self to work. And I think we're all humans, and I think they're kind of like people you work with are like your extended family, because you're spending at least a good chunk of your day with them. Right. So, I mean, if you're unhappy, then I think it clearly shows. Thanks for sharing that.
I love that word authentic. And I think on slide 1, pillar 1, we had that word out there about a person of character, or someone who's very authentic. Brene Brown talks about that a lot. If you know her work, she's also big on TED Talks. She's written several books. I've read one called Dare to Lead, and she talks about two concepts: authenticity, Andre, which you mentioned, but also vulnerability, which you mentioned. And I think that's part of being a good leader too, is showing people that, hey, I'm just like everybody else. I have good days and bad days, and I feel comfortable, fortunately, with my team saying things like, you know what, I just wasn't at my best this last week, or today I was off, or I'm just forgetful right now, or whatever. Just let them know that, hey, I'm not perfect either. And what that means is I don't expect you to be perfect as well. Yeah, I don't have all the answers for sure. Vivek, I thought you wanted to say something, do you?
I do. It may not have to be at this moment, but maybe after we are done with discussing all the slides in the Q&A time, I would like to hear suggestion from the team how we could handle situation where you, either as a Scrum Master or for me as an engineering manager, if you are trying to help your team members with all this personal issue they may be having, but you're also trying to respect their privacy, and they've told something about you with trust, and now you're giving space, which then impacts your, probably your sprint, your work, and all that jazz. And now you have to go and explain that to your manager or your director, and then say like, hey, I'm not able to meet my commitment, or my team is not able to meet my commitment because so-and-so is having problem, right? But you are not able to share all the details. So I'm trying to get some ideas from the team, how you'd still be able to share that with your leader, but maintain that trust that was given to you.
Okay. I certainly am open to that. Let's get to the slides first, and some of the stuff we're going to see might inform that discussion a little bit more as well. We have a bit more context there. I'll just share one more thing before we move to the next slide, which is another book. I love Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And you probably read that one. And he talks about the concept of the emotional bank account. If you don't know what that is, you can probably understand it, which is just that you want to make deposits in people's emotional bank account. Validate them. Andre, just like you said, hey, how you doing? How you feeling? What's going on? You don't have to pry, but just understand them as people, and know what their spouses' names are, their kids, know what their birthdays are, just things like that. It really makes a big difference. Jeff,
I think
saw your hand
Jeff,
up.
yeah.
So what I was going to say is that one of the things that I find more useful when putting people first is it's the same concept as finding the work not to do. It's finding what demotivates people, and finding what disengages them is almost as important as finding out what is engaging to them, because then you can catch things that like just would happen in a day, or you can ask someone, hey, what's going on? Is this happening? Because you know what demotivates them in life or in their work. And it's knowing the detractors of people is almost as important as knowing what the ups are. So
Yep. Good point. I saw the note about pets, and I've done that. One of the benefits of working virtually is you can have themes for stand-up. We do bring your pet for Introduce Your Pet Day, Introduce Your Kids Day, and people put their cat on their lap or their dog and say, this is, Jojo, whatever. Just something kind of fun you can try.
Yeah.
All right, let's keep rolling. We're getting a lot of discussion, which is fantastic. I love this. Pillar 3, a servant leader is a skilled communicator. It means that we listen earnestly and authentically, and we speak effectively, and I would say judiciously. We seek first to understand, then to be understood. That's straight from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits. We listen receptively to others. We demonstrate genuine interest, respect. We just kind of talked about this just a minute ago. We listen honestly and deeply, and we invite feedback from others. Again, I'm here to listen to you. I'm not listening to respond. I'm listening to really understand what you want to say. And then we also influence people with assertiveness and persuasion rather than that formal power and positional authority. Competencies are empathy, feedback, and persuasive communication. All right, what do you think about this one?
My quick answer to this one is, as English being a second language for me, this has been the most challenging in my career. Is trying to communicate in the way and having to translate what I'm trying to say in my head before I say it, and taking that time has been the most challenging part for me.
Some of you may know what an anagram is. It's 2 different words that have the same letters in them, and I see some of you nodding. So somebody give me another anagram for listen. The word is silent.
Silent.
Silent and listen are anagrams. Sorry, Andre, did I cut you off?
I said silent the same time you said silent.
Yeah. And that's a powerful coincidence, perhaps, because when you're listening to somebody, quiet your mind, be still up here, and don't put all the stuff in there. Here's what I'm going to respond. Just take it in and absorb as much as you can. 2 ears, 1 mouth. Absolutely, yes.
And also I think it enables us to observe a lot more and look, and we talk about inviting feedback, right? It's about participation too, right? So I think trying to absorb as much information as you can from the team, and also observe that, okay, maybe I'm not hearing from others on the team. How can I now work with them to understand their thoughts and to build a safe space for them to communicate, I think is extremely important. And how you present that is also important, because I think understanding everyone's communication style and, an assessment of, like a DISC assessment of sorts that tells you how do they like to communicate with the team. So understanding that is extremely important. And yeah.
Yeah, David, I'll get to you in just a second. So one of the things that I heard from Shruti there is a team working agreement. Some of you may do that. It's called a team charter. I've heard that term before as well. And it's really a document that talks about how the team wants to communicate with each other. What are our modes of communication and sort of our standards like that? David, go ahead, please.
Yeah, that triggered something in my mind. As a Scrum Master or leader in general, when you're talking, you're not listening, right? And Shruti, is that right? You mentioned,
Yeah.
not hearing from one of your team members, and when you're talking, you're not picking up on the fact that one or more of your team members aren't contributing, right? And so the more you listen, the more you can see who's contributing, who's not contributing, and the team works best when everybody is contributing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yep. Great call. Andre, what about you?
I have this little whiteboard that you can't see off screen, but I love to chat. I love to talk. I have to watch myself actually. And there's two things that I keep on this board, and it says, ask more questions, be curious.
Yeah.
And especially when people are talking and maybe it gets your dander up, right? It's like all of a sudden they're coming up with something that is just maybe takes you, sort of rubs you the wrong way, or it's like, you want to step back. And it's like, instead of kind of going to that place saying, oh, they're full of, hooey and I'm just not going to listen, that makes no sense, right? I try to remind myself and showing I'm actively listening by asking more questions like, tell me more about this. I'd like to understand, your perspective, because I want to see what life is like from your shoes, and to try to appreciate where you're coming from, because I've never looked at it that way, and try to get more information out of them through curiosity. And that way you avoid putting possibly somebody on the defensive if you ask questions in a different way to sort of try to probe for more understanding.
I'm gonna get to Robin in just a second, but Andre, to me, that goes back to slide 1 on character. We talked about humility. And for me, it's about when you have that inner strength and that inner confidence and humility, then you can allow dissenting opinions. You can hear people and listen from a different perspective. And you said the magic phrase, tell me more. But if you're coming from a position of defensiveness, then you just put up this blocker. But if you can truly say, wow, you know what, maybe you're onto something. I need to learn how you see this because I could learn something from that. That's just an awesome servant leader mentality. Good call. Robin, what you got?
I just wanted to call out that word assertiveness versus power and position, because when we talk about the term servant, sometimes you can assume that you need to be a pushover and always just letting things happen, but actually you still have strength, and you need to help make sure that you're representing the team and other people with that assertiveness, but not taking it to an extreme where then people don't respect you anymore and you're doing other things. But anyway, I really like that word, assertiveness and persuasion, and it even gets to Andre's, if that's how I'm saying your name correctly, points about tell me more, and so that you can really understand why people might have a different point of view or other things like that. But I like those words because they are coming from strength while you're serving.
Yes, great call. Andre, we're going to talk more about accountability in a future slide, actually. Let me wrap up this pillar 3 with a passage from the book. It talks about, it says, a lifelong journey. It says, like water falling on rocks and dissolving hard minerals, calm, persistent listening and direct, respectful sharing of the self can break down barriers to communication and slowly transform people. Servant leaders know that skillful communication is not something we learn once and forget. It is the very stuff of life. It takes conscious effort to improve listening skills, to remove barriers to communication, and let our natural empathy do its magic. And that kind of summarizes a lot of the stuff that we were just talking about. So you're definitely spot on. Pillar 4. Servant leaders are compassionate collaborators. We strengthen relationships, we support diversity, and create a culture of collaboration, a word that many of you probably use often. I certainly do. We invite and reward the contributions of others. Shruti talked about the psychological safety. It's a safe place where people can express themselves honestly and authentically. We want to build that. We pay attention to the quality of work life and strive to build caring, collaborative teams. Andre talked about that, really probing with your team and understanding them and what's going on in their lives other than just work. We relate well to people of diverse backgrounds and interests and values, and we manage disagreements respectfully and constructively. What are some of the core competencies of a compassionate collaborator? We express appreciation. That's come up already. We build teams and communities, and we negotiate conflict. What stands out here?
Well, for me, two things stand out. Negotiating conflict and expressing appreciation. Sometimes we forget to say thank you. We forget to say good job, right? It's almost like if things are going great, it's assumed that everybody's doing a good job and they should know they're doing a good job. And sometimes we've got to stop and recognize that and say, let's take a minute or 2 or 5 and recognize the win. And sort of give yourselves a pat on the back, especially virtually.
Yeah.
And then negotiating conflict, I like that because if you don't have trust, you cannot have conflict, and you cannot have a constructive exchange of different points of view that could yield a better result. Because when you're negotiating conflict, you're enabling that dialogue to happen in a healthy manner. And you're enabling the fact that it's not about people aren't taking pot shots at each other, and they're really staying on the topic and what seems to be in discussion, where do we have differing points of view, and encouraging people to be persuasive with their information, right? It's like, help us understand your perspective. Give us, the background material on your position so we can appreciate where you come from. Help draw out the pros and cons by facilitating that dialogue. You're not there to take sides. You're there to make sure that there's a healthy dialogue that happens and that everybody comes out with some kind of, agreement in the end that everybody's going to support. And it's a skill to negotiate conflict.
Yeah, basically, I think nurturing healthy conflict and ensuring that you build that space for it, which is never easy to do. But I think something that we learn, through experience, I would say, because things can go south very easily when it comes to people who are, because everyone's passionate and they believe in their thoughts and their ideas. So it's just about how do you make sure that it doesn't come across the wrong way in a team full of people who have different communication styles and different ways of expressing their thoughts and ideas. Yeah, lots of lessons learned, I guess, over the years, I would say. So it's never an easy task.
Yeah, Stephen Covey, again, start with the win-win. When negotiation fits right onto this really well. It's one of those things that I've used a lot.
Andre, I'm not sure if you've read 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Have you? Give me a thumbs up if you have. Okay, so you actually called the second dysfunction out, as you know. So the first one is an absence of trust, and then the next one up is a fear of conflict. And you said it, if you don't have trust on the team, then you can't have creative conflict. And that's what you need. You need that psychological safety and that trust where people can say, hey man, this is not going well, and either that's myself, hey, I'm having a hard time, I don't know this, I need help, for example, or something that is more related to the entire team, or possibly the train if you're unsafe, or some larger aspect of the organization. And it takes courage to raise your hand sometimes and say, this is a problem, because people don't like to be confrontational sometimes. It's a great call there. Thank you.
Or sometimes as the Scrum Master, you know, if you find that you've got a lot of yes people, it's like they're all agreeing, and something inside you says they shouldn't all be agreeing right now. And you want to generate the conversation to see if people will step up and really reveal a little more about what they're thinking, instead of like, you get all the nods and it's like, let's move on to the next topic because nobody wants to touch it, right?
Yeah. When you say that, it makes me think of something that came up earlier about, I think it was you, Andre, on your back whiteboard. You talked about asking questions and, you know, and being curious. And I think that when we need to get to the bottom of things like that, one of the most important things we can do is frame questions better. How do we ask the right kind of question? Something open-ended that doesn't allow people to say yes or no, but it just probes a little bit more to extract more information from them. Another great skill for Scrum Masters.
Yeah, and instead of saying why this, more, tell me more about your point of view, or tell me more about this topic, because as soon as you say the word why, and especially depending on the tone that you use, like, well, why did you approach it this way? Careful how you ask that, why did you approach it this way? Because sometimes that can come across as in, like, why did you approach it this way? Right? Instead of tell me more about your approach.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to invite a very different attitude into the dialogue.
Yeah.
Powerful questions, right?
Yeah, there are a lot of books out there about that for sure. Is that one of the titles? Powerful Questions for Things? Is that a book title? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
For some different ones.
There are tons of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
That I think. Yeah, just reading any snippet about it, blogs. I think there's tons out there.
Yeah.
Around that topic.
I remember in Brene Brown's book, Dare to Lead, she talks about this phrase, paint done for me. It's a little bit related, but she says, okay, what does done look like? And I'm not really talking about the definition of done from a Scrum perspective. I'm talking about a broader context here of, let's agree on what we're going to do. What am I going to do? What are you going to do? It goes back to the Scrum commitments that David, you were talking about earlier, one of the Scrum values. And just having that open, honest dialogue and a shared understanding about what done looks like, I think is another powerful thing that I've used before. Let's go to pillar 5. Oh, sorry, pillar 4 still. So this one is just some extra information. I don't want to do a deep dive here, but I found it interesting and wanted to share it with you. This talks about, within the context of a compassionate collaborator and building teams and communities, well, what are some of the different types of leadership personas? Some of you have maybe seen these before, heard of these, maybe by different names, but I found this interesting and I just wanted to go through this quickly. It says servant leaders should understand that any given group has multiple types of leaders and they serve different roles. Now, you probably will identify some of these from people on your team. The first one is a mediator, then a consensus finder, the critic, the meliorator, keeper of the conscience, process watcher, and the titular head. So we don't need to do a deep dive on those. I think Shruti asked me to share a PDF version of this at the end, which I'll be happy to do if anyone's interested. So you can read these on your own. But I found this interesting because some of you probably recognize some of these personas on your teams. All right, sorry, Maggie, you gotta go. Thank you for coming. Let's go to, whoops. All right, pillar 5, foresight. It says a servant leader imagines possibilities, anticipates the future, and proceeds with clarity of purpose. We view foresight as a central ethic of leadership. We know how to access intuition. He talks a lot about that in the book. We can articulate and inspire a shared vision. We kind of talked about that a bit earlier. We use creativity as a tool, and we are discerning, decisive, and courageous decision makers. What are some of our core competencies as servant leaders? We're visionaries, we display creativity, and we also take courageous and decisive action. What stands out to you on this slide?
I think it clearly talks about one of the core Scrum value, right? Courage.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's extremely important in our role as Scrum Masters, because I think conflict is something that we need to deal with quite often in our roles, and I think being able to mediate that it takes courage to give feedback and to take feedback too. So I think
Yep.
that resonates with me. I think Jeff shared in the chat, can articulate and inspire a shared vision.
We talked about courage, Shruti, and there's a quote from the book which I wrote down here. It says, leaders must have an armor of confidence in facing the unknown. And it's sort of like, you know what, I'm going to lead you into battle. That's kind of how I think of it, to use the military analogy. We are, among other things, change agents. We are leaders of change, and we need to embrace that, because we all know that our environments are constantly changing. And that's part of the leadership, to me, is telling the team, hey, come, follow me. And if you build that trust, that credibility, that authenticity, they will follow you. You don't have that formal authority, but you have the kind of respect and credibility where they will do that. And that's tapping into your insights, talks about here, having a vision for what's coming up next. And you can translate that change to how that will positively affect or impact the team or the organization. And that's great leadership.
Grant, I was going to touch on that courageous part, because courage is one of the 5 Scrum values as well. And I know in my work with our dev teams, you know, and I've commented on how courageous developers need to be when they want to do the right thing at the right time. And it might not be the right answer to stakeholders or managers or all those other people, but they need to be courageous to say, no, we're going to do this code right. We're not going to do the quick and dirty, you know, the quick and dirty, oh, that's a 5-minute code job kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think that at a leadership level as well, it takes courage to say, we're going to do this right now. We know we want to accomplish a small, you know, I'm thinking about the Foresight. We know that this is not the optimal. We know we're going to have to rework and to take the hit and say, it's going to change and it's going to be okay. And you guys are going to discover things along the way, and that's going to be okay too. You know, so it's a vulnerability in leadership that in terms of traditional, you know, I don't know, traditional leadership, you got to know where you're going and then you lead them to battle no matter what, as opposed to servant leadership is you got to be okay with being vulnerable to say, I don't know everything. You know, once we get into the act of developing a solution, we're going to find out things and it's going to be okay.
Great call. I think that resonates with David and Vivek, especially since those guys are developers. So they probably have faced that on their teams. And you're right, it takes guts to stand up and say, hey, we're doing this wrong, or something's, yeah. I see good feedback as well. Absolutely. Let's go ahead and jump to the next one. Oops, that was it. All right, pillar number 6, be a systems thinker. If any of you use the Scaled Agile framework, SAFe, you may remember that there are 10 SAFe principles, and number 2 is apply systems thinking. So it's, again, resonates strongly with this theme here. A servant leader thinks and acts strategically. We manage change, we just talked about that, and balance the whole with the sum of its parts. We connect systems thinking with ethical issues. We apply these principles to systems analysis and decision making. We integrate input from all parties. to arrive at a holistic solution, another great way to approach our work. And we demonstrate an awareness of how to lead and manage change. Boy, we set this up perfectly by our discussion on the last pillar. What are some core competencies? Comfortable with complexity. Lucy, you just talked about that. We demonstrate adaptability, and we consider the greater good. It's not just about us, it's thinking across the entire organization sometimes. So great stuff here. What resonates with you on this one?
One of the ones that resonates with me is, obviously, I would put comfortable with complexity, or, sorry, I'm going to turn my camera back on. Comfortable with complexity, or even ambiguity, where the solution is not obvious, but that you're a holistic thinker, and you don't just think about, we have to deliver this next feature, but you think about, if we develop, to sort of pick up on Lucy's idea before, if we develop this feature this way or with these particular shortcuts because it's so important to the customer, what kind of technical debt are we taking on that we'll have to deal with later, right? It's like, we pay them now or we pay them later. Let's just make sure we're making a very eyes wide open decision about those choices. And that, if the upper echelons need to know about it, that you really want this feature, but we're going to incur technical debt that we're going to have to pay later. Just be aware that that's happening, and let's be very transparent about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also, like, when I relate it to what I'm doing in the AI space and data annotation and natural language processing, we wind up, when I look at our relationship with our customer right now, for whom we're doing the work, we might give and take on some of our projects, give on one, but hold fast on another, because we're looking at the greater relationship with our customer and how some of these decisions might impact at the project level versus at the account level. And some of those choices we're making, looking at, okay, we're willing to take a hit on margin here, but on this one, I don't want to take a hit on margin because overall it'll benefit the relationship in the account and win us more business long-term.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple of different.
Yes, great call, Andre. Thank you. David, go ahead, please.
So just a little bit of perspective from the developer standpoint. We hate technical debt. We will argue against whatever you guys want that's going to create technical debt. And so from a leadership standpoint, I think that's important to understand that that group of people is never going to really be comfortable with that. And then comfortable with complexity in general, I think that's wildly important, because from a developer standpoint, we like to have everything kind of understood. We don't like to commit to things where there are unknowns, right? We're going to estimate our user stories much higher when we have unknowns. And when it becomes more complex, then there are more unknowns. So just understanding that, your whole team are made up of different personalities, and their comfort level, especially with regard to complexity. I really see this as the crux, one of the major cruxes to this whole topic, is that, from our standpoint, complexity is very uncomfortable for us.
It is, but it's essential. It's essential in my mind to agility. And when I think about, hey, we don't want any unknowns, we don't want any complexity, we want a 375-page requirements document. Well, that's waterfall. And okay, that works in some cases. And David, I know that's not what you're saying. We all understand that we want to minimize our unknowns for sure. But being able to adapt, which is on here, demonstrates adaptability. That's a key competency. Just again, being willing to roll with the punches, to go with it, not admitting that we don't know everything, and we're going to learn as we go. And that's, I think, one of the key mindset factors there. All right, I cut somebody off. Who wanted to say something?
I would add to that example with or one of the earlier pillar about communication and listening. Like we talk about listening, right? But this is also where when you see a story point that is 13 and you think that it should be like 3, then that's where you're trying to listen why it's 13 or whatever that might be. So that also is part of a listening, I would say.
Yeah. All right, let's keep going. We got one more, and then I think we may have some time to be back to that that topic you mentioned at the beginning. Maybe we can get a little bit of brainstorm going on that. The last pillar is moral authority. It says a servant leader is worthy of respect. We inspire trust and confidence. We establish quality standards for performance. We value moral authority over positional authority. We talked a little bit about that. We empower others with responsibility and authority. We set firm yet flexible boundaries. And we establish, model, and enforce quality standards for conduct and performance. This is the accountability that we talked about a little bit before. The core competencies are: we accept and delegate responsibility, we share power and control, and we do create that culture of accountability. Something that we actually absolutely can do and should do, even though we're servant leaders. What resonates with you about this pillar number 7?
I think accepts and delegates responsibility, and also creates a culture of accountability. We want to build teams that are, they're empowered, to achieve their goals, like self-organized teams. I think those are some of the key competencies, right? So, yeah.
I think some of the teams that I've been managing since January when I joined my current employer, there wasn't a huge culture of accountability, even with the customer that we're dealing with, in terms of, yeah, they wanted us to adhere to a schedule. However, nobody was keeping them accountable on their feedback loops to us. And I go, well, if the customer takes 6 weeks to come back to us, they can't hold us to a 2-week deadline because they just burn 4 weeks that really you can't have it both ways, basically. And they were just really uncomfortable with creating a culture of accountability with the customer for whom we're delivering. And it was like they had boundaries for themselves, but they had no boundaries for the customer. And, as when I stepped in, I started putting up boundaries, and they were really struggling with how much boundaries and how much I was trying to keep the customer accountable for their end of the bargain. And it was really an educational experience for them that I said, it's okay to keep the customer accountable. They're part of this team. And they owe us a piece, and in order for us to be successful, they have to fulfill their piece, or else, they're going to take weeks on end, and then they'll expect us to make up these 5 weeks of delay they just introduced, which we can't, right? So it was just, to me, when you create boundaries, you're basically laying down an expectation that's saying, this is yours, this is mine. And when you have that culture of accountability, you're saying, I'm going to hold you to the boundary you said was yours, and you're holding me to my boundary. And, that's the best way we collaborate. And you also learn that to trust that people are making those commitments and delivering to those commitments that they're making.
One of the themes that I talk a lot with my teams about is ownership and accountability. And I explain what that means. It means I'm not going to babysit you. I'm not going to look in our backlog management tool every day and double check that you're on track, or that you've passed your work on to anybody else who needs to see it, or you've reached out proactively to a product manager for information, or you've blocked your story, or you've written your story the right way. I can't take the time to look at every single user story. I need to trust that you're going to do that. This is part of our expectations. And that's how you are accountable to the team. And setting that expectation, I think, is great upfront, because then they know, okay, here's what I need to do to support the team as well. But one more thing for me, this core competency, it says share power and control. The second one, you may know John Maxwell. He's written many, many books on leadership. That's kind of his #1 topic. I forgot which book it's from, but he has a phrase which I love, which is give your power away. I just love that, because why should I hoard all of the influence and power? No, I want to decentralize decision-making. I want to let all of you have the power, have the authority. There are always guidelines, for sure. And then back to Stephen Covey, my favorite, he talks about this concept of the abundance mentality and the scarcity mentality. You may have heard this term before as well. And to me, this is about the abundance mentality. It's we can all lead. We can all be leaders in our organization. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not that if you get something more, I get something less. That's the scarcity mentality. We can all grow. We can all multiply. We can all learn. And it makes everything better. It's a multiplier effect. So I want to throw that in there as well. What else on the slide? Let's take a look at the last one, actually, which is something we talked about on the second slide, which is how do we implement these kind of things? And I started with that when we talked today at the beginning. Was I wanted to give you some tangible and tactical skills that you can apply in your work every day. So how do you implement some of these concepts? In the book, there's no magic to it. There's no list that says, this is your 4-step process to implement servant leadership. It doesn't work that way. So this list that I've come up with is partly from the book, partly from just my own experience. And you can certainly add more as well. So you may have some other ideas here, but the book does say that everything begins with the individual, but organizations or how you get things done. And that leads to the second bullet, which says servant leadership requires a personal and a communal effort. So it's about personal leadership, team leadership, but how that expands beyond how can you influence people outside of your immediate sphere of control. Now, my team, I talk a lot about this concept of sphere of influence and sphere of control. What are things that we can do at the team level and just make a change automatically? Don't need to ask anybody. Or other things require a more enterprise level input. But these are things that you can influence through your leadership. There's no roadmap. The book says just look around for opportunities. When you look left and right in your workflow, your team, yourself, where can you implement some of these ideas? Talk to others, seek mentors, be transparent, just be open, continue to learn, and communicate intent and seek agreement. We actually talked about that quite a bit. So this is just a primer, but let me ask you, what are some other things that you think about, or maybe that come to mind about how you can implement some of these concepts and ideas in your work?
Can we talk or should we raise our hand?
Go ahead, Robin.
Well, I was thinking about some of the things that are on the other slides, like systems thinking and those types of things. And so I'd say that continue to learn, because I think when you do know a lot of those things, and everybody on this call kept talking about various books, and I think there's so many skills to continually refine. So I just think about that. And then that systems thinking, everything you can pull into multiple areas of this. So for systems thinking, you're looking at the whole instead of blaming an individual, for example. So I think a lot of those come to bear with this kind of leadership.
I like to go back to the, whoa, where did I go? Sorry. I go back to the Boy Scout Edge method a lot, which is explain what we're thinking about, demonstrate it by doing it a little bit, guiding them through it, and then letting someone else take over and let them do it. It's kind of it was a good thing that I learned as a child or as a teenager. And I think that it's still applicable today. Like if you're really wanting everyone to come along with you, you kind of have to go through those steps.
Well, let's actually pivot there. I saw the note from Vivek, and I'm happy to give him some time. So I'll just go to the last slide for just 30 seconds. You don't need to write this stuff down. You can, here's my information if you want to look me up or send me an email, or LinkedIn. You can always find me there for sure. Let me stop sharing and let's maybe take 5 minutes. Vivek, why don't you reintroduce your topic and see what we can get from this brain trust here.
Thank you so much for giving that time for me before I had to leave and jump off. My question earlier was when we were discussing about how we want to build trust with the team and listen to the team and be supportive, not just on the work side, but sometimes goes beyond work side. I come from a situation where, as an engineering manager, I build a very good relation and trusting relationship with my engineers. At some point, when they share, when they trust and share about what personal things that might have affected their work life and why they were not either attentive or not interested or not doing their part, which then impacts the entire team. I then try to help the person. However, I also have my manager and I have to report that and why we were unable to make our commitment. And it is very tricky when I'm unable to share the personal aspect of what is happening with the team member, especially when those team members are senior or be unicorn sometimes, right? And that affects the team much more than might be other engineers. And now I'm feeling with the challenge of how am I able to communicate that with my leaders and still be able to maintain and say that, hey, let's just help this person for a little bit until the person is back up on the saddle and be able to run as they were. So I'm looking for some help and suggestion on if you guys have had such situation like that and any suggestion that you have for me.
All right, let's help them out. A lot of smart minds on this call. What you got for me, Dick?
I think Andre.
Sure.
Yeah, Andre's chance.
So when I've dealt with people who have maybe personal things going on, who knows, they're going through a divorce, maybe there's a death in the family or somebody's seriously ill and they need to, care for somebody at home, what have you, right? Or their child is going through a hard time and they need to spend more time with their family for some reason. The way I have framed it to upper management, if it's impacting my team, what I try to do is establish, is there an end in sight for this person's reduced availability? We'll call it that. Do we know if this is going to be short-term or is this a long-term challenge? Like maybe, somebody's undergoing cancer treatment and who knows how long that's going to last, right? So I try to get a sense for, is there a way for me to predict when that person might be able to come back into the fold, or do I have to think about, do I bring in a contractor to shore up for the work? Can I redistribute work across other people in the group? And just explore some solutions that might give you the capacity you might need to deliver. And that the reason for that is you can at least let your leadership know these are some things I've explored to help shore up for the challenge. When I go to the upper management and I talk about that individual, I'll say, we do have an individual who has, who is currently going through some personal items. We've put we've reminded them that they have all these particular company resources at their disposal to help them go through, manage through the situation they're having. At this point, we don't have an end in sight. And, without invading that person's privacy, they told me these in confidence. We've made, the employee assistance program available to them. We've given them the option to take a leave or a partial leave, whatever it is. And then say, here's some ways we could shore up our capacity, and here's the impact it's going to have, because just ramping up somebody new doesn't mean they're going to be automatically off and running and still deliver on time, but you're at least giving your management the opportunity to say, yeah, we could bring somebody on board, or we'll say, okay, we'll slow down and support this person through the storm. And you still haven't revealed what's going on, but you've told them that you're putting every resource every company resource that's available to them. You've reminded them they can leverage. That's how I would frame it.
Yeah.
That's very helpful. Thank you. I'll take more suggestions if somebody else has.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think what's interesting is, first of all, and this goes back to trust, when we were talking about the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And if an individual is going through a hard time, and I see this, does that team member feel comfortable enough to share with their own team first, to get that caring and compassion and trust within the team? And the team, is the team going to rally and say, we're going to cover for you, we've got this, you have 20%, you're going to do your unicorn thing, or this is the things, only the rest we're going to cover for you. And that is really the caring that team have. So as a leader, I think as a team, if I have someone who's having a hard time and I see my team rally for them, that's what I would tell my leaders up. So I would say, this individual works for a team and they're going to cover for him or her, or they're going to rebalance the load. We might be off by X number of days. I don't know, whatever. Is it gonna be in the end of the world? Maybe not. But I think the value is not necessarily about meeting a date or a deliverable, but I think the really valuable message is to really look at the behavior of the rest of the team that the person belongs to. We have this, we have a guy who has, sleep problems, and sometimes he doesn't show up, but sometimes we're just it's just it's the whole team has to win, right? So if one capacity is down, is safe and our capacity points out, the heck with that. You focus on, okay, let's reset our goal. Let's rejig our goal. So you still meet the goals of the organization and you still have a win to your senior managers and respecting the privacy of the person. So that's my thought on it.
I'm kind of capturing, thank you for that, Lucy, but what I'm capturing from what you said is pretty much when that happens, reset your expectation and what's the word I'm looking for? I'm blanking out. I would say reset your expectation and your commitment, so to say.
You mean of the team deliverables or
correct?
Itself, the team.
Correct.
That's up to the team to decide. That's what we leave it for the team to say. What do you like? As a manager of this individual, the first question is that asking that individual, are you comfortable talking to your team about this and how you guys can solve it as a team? How you can cover for each other to then, yes, reset, re-level the expectations.
Perfect.
Capacity is now this, whatever numbers you guys are using to point or whatever. Yeah. But it's because the bottom line is remembering the humaneness, Agile is to bring humaneness to our world. It's not about capacity and points and dates and the foundational is really seeing the human, the individuals. We have a human, it's man down. So what do? We just say, oh, drop them, turn on the alarms and we're not going to meet our dates. No, we see how we can support each other and rejuggle the situation. There was something on the slide that I saw, and really about what scares me the most is when I see a lot of things on one person. It's not fair to the individual, even though they want to be a superstar. And it's so not smart of the organization to do that, right? So, yeah, remember the humaneness. So I'm hoping that your leaders will get that sense of some humanity and compassion, maybe.
So the only thing that I would add is to take the opportunity to coach or manage up to your managers this book per se, and have them think about things from a broader perspective as well. If they're the type of manager that's very much like I hit the numbers type of thing, go, hey, well, we got a bigger picture here. Like, what's going to happen if we push this person or whatever, like down the road, things will get worse. Like, we want to think about things at a higher level, use servant leadership. They should be a servant leader too. It's a good buzzword for them to try to accomplish. So you try to like say, hey, I'm trying to do this. You should trust me and try to do this as well. We're on the same team, kind of a deal.
Yeah, switching up, I like that. Just a couple of things popped in my mind, that kind of in support of what Lucy was talking about. One is it's important to talk about the concept of success or failure at the team level and not the individual level. And if you have a problem with a couple of individuals on the team, one of your original questions was, how do you communicate that to the leadership? And the way that I would suggest you think about that is to not talk about Joe has a problem or Susan has a problem, but just say, the team for the sprint is not going to be able to deliver on our commitments because we have some team issues. Just leave it at that level. That's one thing. The other thing is this idea of cross-functional teams, which Lucy talked about, is do you have the ability of the team to fill in that gap? Can they make up for one person being out or not performing or something like that? And in the long run, that can really build not only tangible skills, but can really build a sense of identity among the team too. So it possibly has a couple of good takeaways there. I see we're almost at time, at least for you, Vivek. So any final comments for Vivek before he has to leave?
Hopefully you got some good ideas that can help you manage.
I did. Thank you all. And I will give it a try. And when that works, then I'll come back and share what happened.
Great. Good.
And hopefully your team member will be well soon too.
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
right.
Bye.
Take care, everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Happy to do that.
So we'll share that out as well. Thank you so much, everyone. Again, Grant, can't thank you enough. This was an extremely interactive conversation that we had. There's so
Yes.
much that I took back, and I'm glad that we're able to help each other out and share our experiences. So thank you so much. And
Yeah, great.
I really appreciate everyone participating too. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Good night.
Bye. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.